Man, hold up. Man, what up, everybody, man? Long night. Long night. Long night. Long day. I've been out in the woods. Yeah, we buried my grandfather yesterday. Man. Man. I need some on my hands too. Still ain't killer day yet, but I'm trying. I'm working on that one. I'm working on it. The weather changing. Hey, hopefully down there is what's in the plan and what's in the future. All right, we're back at it in this session of Reading with SHILO. This is part 24. Part 24 of Africans in Colonial, Louisiana by Ms. Gwendolyn Midlo Hall, man. We're going to try to work our way through it tonight. I feel like that thing is all foggy. I got my other books in. So since my other books came in, The Last President and this other one, The Last President and Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, both by Ingerson Lockwood. There we go. That's better. Last President and I want to get to reading these, but before I can read those, we have to get through Africans in Colonial, Louisiana, and these are short. These are short books, so we'll hurry up and mash through these, but I got to get through this first. So we left off in chapter 9. We was making our way through chapter 9, rolling our way to chapter 10 of Miss Gwendolyn Midlo Hall, Sea of Pages. I don't really remember, man, straight up what the last one was about. But let's pick up where we left off and let's try to make our way to chapter 10. Chapter 10. Africans in Colonial Louisiana. This is chapter 9. Let me go back to it. Re-Africanization under Spanish rule. Okay, yeah. Spain had then took over. Yeah, Re-Africanization under Spanish rule, chapter 9. We're going to seek and see what treasure we can find, baby. We out, yo. All right, throughout this Spanish period, the age and family structure of the population facilitated the influence of the African slaves as biological as well as fictive kin. And the vast majority of adults, male and female, were Africans. And many of the Creole slaves had an African parent or parents, as well as living African grandparents or great-grandparents. Because of the high sex ratio among the Bambara, the oldest African grandfathers were reasonably likely to be Bambara and the grandmothers Wolof. And there were sold old African couples who no doubt came from the French slave trade, and the old Bambara male Creole female couple was sold in 1771. An old Wolof couple was inventoried together in 1778, and in 1779 an old Bambara male and Wolof female couple were sold. An old Congo couple was sold for the estate of Edmond in 1786. And in this estate, the median age of Creoles over the age of 14 was 22, and of Africans, 50, indicating that the Creoles were likely to have been born of African parents. Now, which African nations supplied the mothers and which the fathers? The list dating from the 1700s indicate that couples were often from the same African nation, and no one estate inventoried in 1779, there was a Congo couple, an old Maninga couple, a Yoruba couple, and a Senegal Wolof couple and their child. and several Wolof couples and their children were inventoried together, and two of these couples were on the same estate. Now, one of these couples turned up again with a new child, and in 1782, a young Igbo couple, their three Creole children, aged 6, 4, and 1.5, and 23-year-old Igbo man, were sold to a free mulatto couple. And among the slaves from Senegambia, the Bambara had 9.8 men to each woman, and the highest proportion next came to the Fulbe with 8.5, and then the Meninga with 2.4. Women were the majority among the Wolof at 0.06 man to each woman. And although there were few Bambara women in Louisiana, one was inventoried with her 4 children in 1798. And because of the high male sex ratio among the Bambara, we find, not surprisingly, Bambara men married to Wolof and Creole women. A Bambara male Creole female couple and their 2 children were inventoried in 1778. And what were the nations of the African fathers? The information about fathers of slave children in Spanish Louisiana is sketchy, especially after the 1700s. And nevertheless, Africans are well represented among the relatively few fathers found in the Point Coupee inventories. Now, among 26 fathers identified, 11 were Africans and fathered of a total of 21 children. 2 of the fathers were Creole, including one from Karuakai, and 4 English Creoles, and they fathered 23 children. And the 5 fathers whose nations were unidentified fathered 12 children. Now, from these figures, admittedly scanty, it appears that African men were a slight majority of the fathers of identified nations, and that they fathered nearly half the Creole children. Now, our information about the nations of the mothers is, of course, much more complete, and a useful basis for comparison is the child-woman ratio, calculated by dividing the number of children under age 5 by females 15 to 44 years old. Now, this is probably the most accurate gauge of fertility, since no African children under the age of 5 are listed in the records, and the children were usually, but by no means always, inventoried with their mothers at this age. And in the inventories, there were 259 African women and 203 Creole women aged 15 to 44. But the African women gave birth to only 132 children, and 81 under the age of 5, giving a slave child or woman ratio of 0.313% for African women. And the Creole women gave birth to 195 children. That's more than Africans. And 135 under the age of 5. My bad. No, it's not more than Africans. They was under. But they had 3 more women, giving a slave child or woman ratio of 0.665%. Now, all the women of this age group, including those of the unidentified nations, totaled 557, and all the children under the age 15 totaled 636, and with children under the 5 totaling 262, giving a slave child or woman ratio of a 0.470%. And the slave children woman ratio for the British West Indies between 1817 and 1832 ranged from a low of 0.352 in Grenada in 1872 to a high of 0.738 in the Bahamas in 1834. Man, it sounded like I was reading some temperature. I'm gonna go down here in Grenada, spin back up to the high in the Bahamas. Now, no transient conclusion should be drawn from the figures or from these figures about the fertility of African women compared with Creole women, because many of the African women have been torn away from their children when they were captured and sold in Africa. And the main concern here is to gauge the percentage of Creole children who were born to and socialized by African mothers. And these figures reveal that 40.4% of children whose mothers' nations were identified were born to African mothers. Now, 33 African children aged between 5 and 14 had no mothers indicated on the slave list. And they had probably been shipped from Africa separately from their mothers and or their fathers. And the largest number of them, 13, were Congo. As we have seen, Creole children were often separated from their mothers at an early age. And the lack of recognition of biological fathers under the Spanish regime left many children living on the estates without either parent and few with fathers present. And the vast majority of the adult slaves were Africans. And many of them had been separated from their own children in Africa. And because of the high sex ratio among slaves in Louisiana and the competition of white men for women of African descent, the chances for men to form new families were limited. And African men tended to informally adopt the large numbers of Creole children. Hey, y'all gonna be the stepdaddies. Here y'all go. Y'all be the stepdaddies. Informally adopt. Let me mark that down. Where's my pen? Where's my pen when I need it? African men tended to informally adopt the large numbers of Creole children, as well as the sprinkling of African children living on their estates without their parents. And traces of the phenomenon of informal adoption can be seen in slave testimony in the conspiracy trials. The parental role assumed by African men toward Creole and African children surely contributed toward the re-Africanization of the culture and creating and extending a fictive kinship network. Now, families were broken up by estate sales, but slaves were rarely sold out of the district. And the last thing Pointe-Coupee slaves did was to remain on their respective estates. And the separate sale of family members, far from breaking up the family, the slave family, extended family networks throughout the area. Now, fictive kin, as well as blood kin, were involved. The godparents of newborn, the newly Christianized slaves were usually slaves, the affranchis, or the masters from the estates throughout the districts, and slaves were very much aware of their maternal, and sometimes their paternal descent. Now, although African women gave birth to fewer Creole children than did Creole women, there was an enormous differential in birth rates among women of various African nations, as well as a sharp difference in the sex ratio among them. Now, the Igbo women were the most fertile, followed by the Wolof and the Kango women. Now, though they were only 13 Kango women found in inventories, for women were the Fon women were the next most fertile. And these same nations had the lowest sex ratios. Now, the women of other African nations had few children, and only 5 children were identified on the list as having been born to 59 Congo women. Now, because women outnumbered or nearly equaled men among certain African nations brought to Louisiana, and the women of these same nations appeared to be substantially more fertile than other African women, the mothers of Creole children born of African mothers during the Spanish period were likely to be Igbo, Wolof, or Fon. Now, the higher fertility among these nations can perhaps be accounted for by the fact that they lived along the Atlantic coast and had not been as physically damaged as women brought from the interior. All I can think about is how them roosters be getting on them hens back there. Coming all the way from the interior of Africa, they say, and them boys is getting at their ass. We cannot draw any conclusion about the vital rates of the slaves' estates when they could get away with it. And they did show a clear pattern of disproportionate deaths of male slaves, especially of male children. And while the sex index among all slaves at the post was 1.40, the population from the data available. That don't sound right. While the sex index among all the slaves at the post was 1.40, the population from the data available. We are dealing with a mobile population, and even if we confine ourselves to studying the Creole slaves, no conclusion can be drawn from the population at this one settlement. And many slaves, especially those of Protestant masters, were neither baptized nor buried in the church, and were vital records were kept and except for a very few years. For a very few years, the baptismal records are confusing, and there are gaps, and sometimes large ones, and between age of birth and baptism. Many of these records do not give age or date of birth at all, indicating perhaps baptism of adult Africans, but it is impossible to tell what from the records. Now, church records do not give the nations of the slaves, and the burial records of St. Francis Church of Pointe-Coupee, dating between 1786 and 1802, are a bit clearer, but they only distinguish between male and female, child and adult, without giving specific ages and nations. These burials should not be used to calculate cruel death rates. And because burying the slave in the church costs money, and many masters, Catholic as well as Protestant, buried slaves on their sex index among slaves buried in the church was 2.3 for adults and 4.40 for children. And though it appears that more males, not many, that more males than females were born, these same pattern of a disproportionate rate of births as well as of deaths among male children can be seen in Guadeloupe. Now, the sex ratio among Creole slaves declined with the age and evened out after age 34. And it is possible that higher mortality among young males resulted from processing indigo, and which is a toxic substance. And clearly then, the slave population at the Pointe-Coupee post was heavily Africanized during the Spanish period. And it is probable that most Creole slaves had at least one African parent, and some of them had African grandparents and great-grandparents living at the post. And the cultural influence of the new Africans with particularly great because of the breakup of the slave family under Spanish rule that began simultaneously with the re-Africanization. And many of the children lived on the estates without either parent and with adults who were overwhelmingly Africans who became fictive as well as biological kin. And the two largest contingents of slaves arrived from Senegambia. Man, hold up. And the Bight of Benin. And if we can judge by the numbers and the distribution of the Africans at the Pointe-Coupee post, and by their role as fictive as well as biological kin of the children, the Mande culture was reinforced during the re-Africanization, and manifesting itself in folk tales and proverbs of Mende origin in Louisiana Creole and in the Mende words for charms like zin and gris. Or grigri, the zin, and the grigri. Now, fauna in Europe are religious practices deeply influence the culture and accounting for the emergence of and the resilience of voodoo in Louisiana. Now, fawn in Yoruba women were present in significant numbers, and they tended to be clustered on the states. And unlike Haitian voodoo, Louisiana voodoo was dominated by women. Unlike Haitian voodoo, Louisiana voodoo was dominated by women. And mark that thing right there. And mark that. Unlike Haitian voodoo. What? Louisiana voodoo was dominated by women. Now, a substantial number of the Congo slaves were brought in from Central Africa, but they did not speak mutually in intelligible languages, and the Congo women seemed to have fewer children. Now, the Congo, as well as most other African slaves, were socialized into a culture and language that had long been formed by slaves who had come overwhelmingly from Senegambia. Now, Congo influence is, however, discernible discernible in the bambule of folk dance and in the use of the term the wanga for a magical charm. Now, although the settlers at Point Capee hastened to declare their loyalty to Spain when O'Reilly reestablished Spain's rule in 1769, the Point Capee post remained French and or Louisiana Creole was spoken, and all the reports from the post, commandants to Spanish officials, were written in French. Now, almost all the documents at the post were in French, and Spanish remained almost unknown at the post. It was like, the hell with your Spanish. Bonjour. Comment ça va? Ça va bien? Et bon, like, hola, bonjour. When you gonna speak Spanish? Español? No. Bonjour. Comment allez-vous? Oh, man. Pooh. Fuck your Spanish. Although the settlers at Point Capee hastened to declare their loyalty to Spain when O'Reilly established Spanish rule in 1769, the Point Capee post remained French and or Louisiana Creole were spoken, and all reports from the post commandants to Spanish officials were written in French. Almost all the documents at the post were in French, and Spanish remained almost unknown at the post. Anybody knows damn Spanish? The Louisiana Creole language and the culture had long been formed, and outside the capital, Spanish Louisiana remained French, Acadian and Creole in language and culture. Now, the Indian frontier was more secure during the Spanish period, and the important Indian fur trade along the Red River was monopolized by the merchant Tourneur. How you pronounce that shit? How do we pronounce this shit? Tourneur? Tournior? Tourneur? Tournionoir. Tournoir. This looks like bam. Man, that street place in Ville Play. Let's see. Definition of pronunciation. The French word is pronounced tu renat, tu renat. It is a masculine noun meaning tournament, and the pronunciation is approximately tournoi, tu renat, renat, tu renat. All right, tu renat was monopolized. The important Indian fur trade along the Red River was monopolized by the merchant Turana, the merchant tournament, or the merchant Turana, whose agent among them was described as a great Haringer. Now, fear of Indian attacks persisted, and especially during the wartime and the outbreak of the American Revolution, there was a severe food shortage that no doubt affected the delivery of corn and other gifts normally provided to the Indians. Now, nevertheless, all the small nations, including the Tunica, who were described as very attached to the settlers, came to the fort to sing, dance, and smoke. And smoke the calumet. What's some calumet? Boy, you got that calumet. Smoke that calumet and renewing their allegiance to the King of Spain, promising to make themselves worthy of his royal protection through their fidelity. And several chiefs asked for the uniforms and the medals and flags. The commandant believed, however, that it was impossible to unite these small nations under the chief whom they would elect because of the divisions in the interests and the conduct among them. And when seven American boats, commanded by Jim Willing, descended the Mississippi River, arriving at Point Capiz post on February 26th of 1778, peace with the Indians was seriously threatened. Let's see what that is. Calumet. What's that calumet? Calumet.
Calumet can mean a few things. It's a U.S. petroleum company, a Michigan mining town, or a sacred pipe, sometimes called a peace pipe, used in indigenous American ceremonies.
She's about that peace pipe. Calumet peace pipe, baby. Calumet, the pipe. A ceremonial pipe sometimes called a peace pipe, used by many indigenous American tribes. It was and is used in ceremonies often for making peace. The word calumet or calumet comes from the French word for reed or flute, and the pipes were often made from a stone called the catlinite or the pipestone, with the source of pipestone in Minnesota, with a source in Pipestone, Minnesota. So what they was had they pipestone shipped down here by Amazon. What do it look like? They got some images. Calumet. Ooh, they put it on a damn some baking soda. Put the thing on some baking soda. Calumet. And look, they got that Indian head. They got the boy head, Indian head on there on some baking soda. That's that peace baking soda. Look at that calumet. Look at that calumet. You hear with that calumet? The post commandant reported that they left nothing behind them except for the American settlers whom they did not touch. And according to the commandant, the detachment, when commissioned at Philadelphia, consisted of 28 men. And by the time it reached Point Capi, it comprised about 200 men of all nations, motivated by the desire for loot, willing, oh, that's that boy name, Willing had promised his men that all the fugitive slaves, as well as the slaves of all British subjects in the area, would be given up to them, and they sought refuge at Point Capee from the storm. Now, the commandant refused to allow them to land with all their arms, and pointing out that the British subjects in the area were under the protection of the King of Spain. And after leaving Point Capee, they broke into the house of Jean-Baptiste Maloutre, Jean-Baptiste Maloutre Lebris at Baton Rouge, and seizing 32 slaves belonging to two British merchants who had sought refuge there. And they seized a British Angers, off the ship of a settler who was heading for Natchitoches, and British slave traders, including Georges Profit and several of other British subjects, asked to become citizens of Spain, placing themselves and their property under the protection of the Spanish crown. Now they brought 60 and 70 slaves with them, as well as their belongings. And as soon as the Americans arrived, Tunica and Onfugula, the Indians came to the fort in alarm, and they were reassured by the commandants that the whites were fighting amongst themselves and not against the red men. Oh, don't worry about nothing. They killing themselves. Don't worry about nothing. You good. Hey, do your thing. Smoke up. Oh, shit. They were assured by the commandant that the whites were fighting amongst themselves and not against the red men, who had nothing to fear. But after leaving Point Capee for Manchac, the Americans shot 5 or 6 unarmed Choctaw warriors, and they encountered along the river, killing one of them. And the commandant was alarmed by the reaction of the Indian nations, writing, "Oh, you was, huh?" Writing, "I am taking all necessary precautions here to avoid being attacked by these savages, of whom more than 80 from different nations have already arrived for the haronga, the herring, H-A-R-A-N-G-U-E, harangue from the harangue, not terrain, bitch. Harangue. Come on, Terminator. I thought you was the Terminator. Yeah, there go at the top. What's a harangue? I was right. Say it again. Harangue. I was right in that thing. The harangue. What did it mean from the harangue? What did it mean? What did it mean? Harangue. A lengthy and aggressive speech. A harangue. That boy trying to give me the harangue, huh? Let's see how many pages we got to, man. Oh, we got some pages. Some of them we're gonna see. We're gonna see. Let's rock it though. Now, Willing was well received in New Orleans by Governor Bernardo de Galvez, and was allowed to sell most of his loot there. And after the American Revolution, Spain became an important bulwark against the expansion of the United States at the expense of the Indian nations, strengthening Indian loyalty to Spain. Now, the Tunica remained consistently loyal to the officials at Point Capee, and the Tunica village contained only 33 people in 1766, but individually, free Tunica Indians lived on several estates as well. Now, Spain had an important legal impact upon Louisiana, And the best informed scholars had praised the Spanish judicial system as it was applied in Louisiana for its thoroughness, its fairness, and economy, and um, arguing that it was in many ways superior to what came before and after. And there was a significant extension of rights to slaves, except in the vital area of protection for the slave family. Now, although O'Reilly directed the observance of the Code Noir when he took control of Louisiana in 1769, Spanish law and practice quickly superseded that of the French. Now, while Spanish law extended certain formal rights to slaves, including the rights to complain to the authorities about the mistreatment of, and the rights to force masters to estimate their price so that they or others could purchase or and free them. The protection of the slave family evaporated within a few years after Spain took control of Louisiana. Now, the French Code Noir had prohibited the separate sale of mother, father, and children under 14 years of age. And while the earliest slave lists of the Spanish period still reflect concerns about the inventorying and selling slave families together, including husbands and fathers, wives and children. And there was a sharp deterioration in the protection of the slave family, and within a few years after the Spain took over Louisiana. Now, in 1773, the commandant at Point Capee complained that two slaves inventoried on the estate of Dame d'Escure, one named Gassou and the other a negresse named Francois de Popon, claimed the right to choose their own master. Him. Oh, I got the right to choose. I want to go with Coca-Cola. Man. We almost, where I'm at. Let me see where I'm at. It's like 5 more pages to chapter 10. I know I want to finish this page at least for sure. The piece to this. Man. I think we're going to stop here, man, on the next page. We're going to give it one more full page for sure. We're going to stop right here. And next time we'll come back, we'll finish off chapter 9 all the way. But let's finish this. One more page. Page and a half, so to speak, page and a half. Now there they had left for New Orleans to insist that Francois Mulatto's children aged 6 and 7 not be separated from her. Now the commandant wrote, I was good enough not to take away the youngest from her, but she is not satisfied. I beg you to state your intentions in this matter to serve me as a rule for the sale of the negress in the future. And thereafter, the practice was to inventory the sale slaves and sell slaves above the age of 6 or 7 separately from their mother. Now, sometimes The filial relationship between mother and child was stated. Filial. Filial. I don't know what the filial is. Filial. Filial.
Filial.
Filial. Of or due from a son or a daughter. Filial. Sometimes the filial relationship between mother and child was stated, but they were priced and often sold separately, like batteries. And among the 636 children identified in the Point Compete list, 250 or 39.3% were inventoried without any indication of who their mothers were. And 89 of 89 of these children were under 8 years of age. 89 of these children were under the age of 8. And 150 were between 8 and 13. Now, three whose mothers had perhaps died were inventoried with their fathers alone. The baptismal records from the Church of St. Francis of Point Compete did not indicate the name of the father of the newborn slaves, and the baptismal records gave the name of the mother and the mother of her master and of the godparents, and describes the infant as a natural child born of an unknown father, and church marriages among slaves were rare indeed. And the commandant at Point Compete quickly discovered that the slaves were bold and independent-minded, very much aware of their rights and ready to travel to New Orleans to complain if these rights were violated. And during the summer of 1774, the commandant seized and sold the horses belonging to slaves, raising 1,100 livres. He'd been jacking them boys and selling their stuff. He used this money to repair the fort, which was falling in ruins, and explained that he had taken this measure because it was illegal for slaves to own horses, and the slaves had been traveling around freely at night, and their masters had closed their eyes to their slaves' activities and claiming that they had no way to stop them. And the commandant wrote, "I thought it useless to inform you of this police action applauded by the settlers, which is appropriate for repressing the disorder which has reigned here for a long time." And three Negroes described by the commandant as the most notorious rogues of the most notorious rogues of this coast. It's three niggas. They're the most notorious rogues of this coast. If you see them, you better watch out. What do they look like? I don't know. They niggas. They Negroes. The Negroes. Three Negroes described by the commandant as the most notorious rogues of this coast, left for New Orleans without the permission of their masters, to ask that the money obtained from the sale of their horses be returned to them. The commandant wrote, "I hope that you will pay them no mind." Pink people to pink people. Don't pay him no mind. He wrote my letter. I'm sending you a 4-page letter, and I sincerely thank you. The commandant wrote, I hope that you will pay them no mind, and that they be punished as they deserve. And the 3 Negroes were put in jail for traveling to the capital without a passport or permission from their masters, so neither their nor other Negroes will dare commit a similar action, and until a decision was made about their complaints. Now the 3 Negroes were back at the post within 2 weeks. First day out, I'm out this bitch. He can't hold a brother down. He can't hold a brother down. Fresh out. The 3 Negroes were back at the post within 2 weeks. I did my little 14 days, you know. Boasting to all their friends that they had prevailed in the capital. That they had not been punished, that their complaints were headed, and that they were heeded, and that the commandant would be relieved of his post because of their actions. And evidently, some of the masters backed up their slaves, questioning the amount of money the commandant had raised from the sales of the horses, and what had become of it. And he explained that the proceeds from the sale of the place were placed in the hands of the dispensatory named by him, as well as the fines imposed in accordance with other orders and rulings, which evidently cut sharply into the receipts. He assured his superior that the majority of the most sensible settlers came to beg me to repress this insolence which, if remaining unpunished, can only incite others to bring complaints to you about the least deserved punishments. Man, I'm gonna stop right there. Oh, my eyes getting heavy now. Oh, man, I was thinking about my papa, man, until before I started reading, man. Tears was falling. Oh, man, my papa. Hey, but that was part 24. Part 24 of Africans in Colonial, Louisiana by Ms. Gwendolyn Midlo Hall, man, to see her pages that was laid to us. Man, they didn't care nothing about their Spanish language. He said, man, we speak that French Creole around here. Mm-hmm. Ça passe, Nabouli. Oh, man, that's funny. What that boy said then. The 3 Negroes were back on the post within 2 weeks, boasting to all their friends that they had prevailed in the capital. I'm out you. Hey, but we're gonna keep pushing, man. We got like 5 more pages to get to chapter 10. Man. Try to make it to chapter 10 quickly. We're gonna try to make it to chapter 10 because it's chapter 10 and then chapter 11. 10, then 11. Ooh-wee. 10. All this is 10. And all this is 11. But we can work it though. 10 and 11. 10 and 11. Unrest during the early 1790s. Man, oh man. Oh, wait. Now I'm tired. Hey, oh man. Hey, but man, we're gonna keep pushing. We're gonna keep pushing. I'm trying to read The Last President. That's the one I want to read right here, man. I want to read this one. This one like 10 pages. 11. I mean, 47 pages, like 10 chapters. Or 11 chapters. 10 or 11 chapters, but the chapters are very small, and it's 48 pages. I think we could do this, man. You know, man, I don't know, man. I'm gonna see. I can do extra time. Maybe 2 hours, a 2 hour session. A 2 hour session. I think I could read this whole book in 2 hour session. I might have to try. But that was Miss Gwendolyn Hall, See a Pages, man. We'll come back next time and keep going to chapter 10. We'll keep pushing to chapter 10. See what treasures lurk, man. This has been Reading with SHALOM, man. I'm SHALOM, man. I'm out here, man. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Tell you people, man, we out here reading. We're trying to learn some stuff, man. We're trying to learn some stuff. Be better one day at a time. Push through the things that, may be hard. Push through the things. Debts. You gotta push through them. Push through them. Oh, man. Till next time, everybody. SHALOM. Woo. I'm good. How about you? I'm tired. I'm gone.